Brian, cutting through the noise. For those of you that don't know who Cambridge Design Partnership are, quick overview. We're a product design consultancy based just outside of Cambridge. We also have an office in Palo Alto, multidisciplinary team, and we work across healthcare, consumer product, energy, and industrial product. But that's enough about us. I thought the synopsis of today's event was really, really interesting, quite provocative actually, quite useful in the context of the fact that it said that maybe UX is just a nice to have, and I'm sure that most of us that work in this sort of space would thoroughly disagree with that. Today, UX, we're talking about life and death situations, but actually there's another sort of commercial side of this, in that I think now, because UX is so important, that actually it can be the commercial life or death of an organisation if they are offering their customers a poor user experience. So we're invited to talk about UX. I'm going to spice it up a little bit and talk about sex. Stakeholder experience, that is. And this is predominantly because a lot of life-changing situations, in our experience, often focus on multiple key stakeholders, all of whom demand prioritised and sometimes differing, but highly efficient experiences, often to achieve slightly different, albeit related outcomes. So what we're trying to do is to focus on optimising those stakeholder experiences. And we focus on three things. The first of them is outcomes. So what's important? Who are your key stakeholders? What's important to them? What are they trying to achieve? The second one is accuracy of assessment. Correctly identifying the most important information that needs to be conveyed. And the third one is speed of response. So prioritising those challenges and then reacting to them. So we have this model, stakeholder-centered model, to help cut out the noise and try and optimise a user experience specification in these potentially life-threatening scenarios. And the element of speed is probably one of the interesting ones that most clearly differentiates between, for example, a consumer scenario whereby a more leisurely experience is actually part of an optimised experience. So we're trying to minimise interactions in these sorts of scenarios in order to deliver or create or get to the maximum benefit. But this isn't an easy or superficial task. What's interesting is we go about our lives as consumers out in the big wide world, we often come across experiences that are less than optimised. And it's sometimes clear that not very much attention has been given to those. And in my view, that's often because these things have been thought about too late in the development process. And as we all know, it's very, very important to talk about, and think about, and work out what your user experience is going to be right at the front end of this process. To put it all into context, we can't just sit in an office and imagine what the future user experience is going to be. We've got to get out there, we've got to talk to people, we've got to go all over the world. And these are just some of the places that we operated doing deep, immersive, qualitative research last year alone. And these were three of the people that we talked to. You can see just from these snapshots, they all have a need. Maybe a very explicit need, maybe waving their arms around and saying, I need this, or it may be more of an implicit need. But there's definitely need scenarios going on there. So we have to identify what's important to these people. So, why do businesses still get it wrong these days? Well, again, coming back to this process thing, focusing on getting it right at the front end, we believe it's because businesses aren't asking the right questions of the right people at the right time. So get out there, talk to the right people at the right time. So you wouldn't want to talk to the logistics team, the product development process right at the back end. You want to start talking to them right at the front, for example. There's a guy who's very good at this. Anyone know who this is? Brilliant. Okay, he is very, very, very good at scouring the detail, asking the right questions. As you know, headed up GB cycling team. They've become the most successful team in any sport in the history, I think, of both world and Olympic level. And the reason I really like his approach is because it talks about marginal gains. Anyone know this? So it's this idea that actually, if you break everything down into its granular detail, anything in this case that goes into riding a bike, improve it by 1%, actually you're going to get an aggregation of quite significant benefit. And by the way, this works in reverse. So an aggregation of marginal losses means that actually you're going to deliver a really bad experience. So this guy did a lot of mapping, a lot of research, and he started off with all the really obvious stuff, the weight of the bike, the nutrition, the training regime, and so on. But then he started getting really, really, really deep. And he mapped every touch point, and you've probably heard the proverbial story about assessing which was the best pillow that gave the riders the best sleep. And he took those pillows to the hotels with him. He looked at teaching all of the riders to carry around hand gel with them, so they sanitised their hands periodically through the day to minimise their risk of getting infections. If they weren't getting infections, then they were training more effectively because they were healthy more often, and so on and so on. So he identified every single touch point in that process. It probably took him a bloody long time and was very boring. But he did an awful lot of mapping. It was great to see Ivo's maps up here earlier on, and clearly all of you know that mapping is very, very important to UX. The important thing is you need to do this granular level of detail right across the board in order to understand what are the most important elements. So we've got 3 very short case studies that we're going to show you how the 3 key elements, speed, accuracy, and so on, that we identified earlier on, come out and talk about how those particular points really manifest in these case studies. The first one, this is a product we developed a few years ago. It's a blood diagnostics device for people with diabetes. It would have been very easy to have got sucked into developing a sort of purely functional lancing device, limited front-end research to a few key opinion leaders. But we wanted to talk to real users, and actually it was very, very enlightening. When we got out there, we started meeting with people. We realised that there were multiple stakeholders with different needs. One of the greatest insights was identifying that sometimes the patients aren't the users. And in this case, more specifically, some of the users are the parents of small children with type 1 diabetes. So what was interesting about this is that several times a day, some poor parent is having to basically draw blood from their child, hurt that child, several times a day in order to manage their health. As a parent, I can't even imagine what that must be like. But identifying these 2 different stakeholders in this scenario, their different respective needs, a child who doesn't want to be hurt, doesn't want to be afraid, doesn't want to be in pain, and a parent that wants to not have their child in pain, but also to help manage their health, meant that we actually set off on a technology inquiry to deliver the lowest pain, minimally invasive lancing device ever seen. But the beauty of the user experience in the final product is that they didn't see any of that complexity. The magic was delivered at the touch of a button.
So this is the first example, and in this case it's about accuracy and how accuracy can impact life. And these are first response medics. In this case it's the military, but it's the same if you're a paramedic. One of the most difficult situations for them is multi-casualty scenarios. They don't have any resources, but they're the ones who have to prioritise life. And this is how they do it. We have this flow diagram. And they look at their patients, and they see, are they walking? Are they injured? Are they breathing? Are they not breathing? Can we get them to breathe? How fast are they breathing? Is it too fast? Is it too slow? How fast is their heart beating? Is it too fast? Is it too slow? And so we asked them, we spoke to a lot of frontline medics, we said to them, exactly what is it that's decreasing the accuracy with which you categorise patients in these terrible situations? And they said, there's 3 main points. And that they were all these points are around the monitoring of those vital signs, because it's all done manually for these first response medics. At the moment, they have to walk up to these patients, they have to assess the situation, it could be noisy, dangerous, stressful, and they have to touch, feel, assess, count in their heads, time, and record that information. And they don't always do it right. They can miscalculate it, and they can do it so it's not regular enough that they're keeping up to date with how that patient is doing. So what did we do? We translated that thinking into something which could help them improve the user experience of triage. And this is a concept idea, which hopefully we'll do some testing with next year, which can increase the accuracy of that vital signs measuring and ultimately increase the accuracy of that triage. So you don't have over triage, which is too many people being taken away or being given too much treatment and others lose out, or under triage, where someone is not spotted as being important enough to receive treatment or be taken to a secondary facility. And this is done through enabling the real-time data of heart rate and breathing rate and deterioration alerts so that they can be getting on with their job. And this device gives them an experience, an all-seeing eye of what's happening around them. And also trend information, so they can see, is the situation getting better or is it getting worse? But by having this accuracy, the accuracy of information, we realise that it's not just useful to the medics themselves. Anybody who's managing the evacuation and the treatment of these patients further down the line, with that information, they're able to plan and understand more. But it only works if there's minimal friction to achieve those maximum outcomes. So this is another project that I'm working on at the moment. This is an example where maybe the primary driver is speed. This is a uterine balloon tamponade. It's used to treat postpartum hemorrhage. So postpartum hemorrhage is when there's severe bleeding after childbirth, and it's the #1 killer of new mothers globally. It's 130,000 mothers a year die from this, and it's almost entirely preventable. This device, for example, is 98% effective in treating postpartum hemorrhage. So what is this device? It's a hollow tube, and onto the end of it you tie a condom, because that's what's available in a lot of these settings where this is needed. And then you get a syringe, you fill it up with water, and you insert the balloon into the woman, and you fill up the balloon with water to create an internal pressure on any wounds to stop bleeding. So what's the use steps in this? If you map it out, it's very complicated. It's difficult to train. So what we've done is we've looked at how that use process can be optimised. And again, this is something we're hoping to test in simulated use testing in Sub-Saharan Africa next year. So in this version of the device, what you have is you have a balloon which is always attached. You have an insertion shaft which is just the right rigidity to help you get it into place single-handedly. It's worth saying the previous device needs 2 people to use it. This device, in theory, could be used by 1 person. That insertion has got enough rigidity to get the balloon in the right location, but it holds up on too much rigidity to cause any damage. Then the inflation technique isn't a manual 3-step process. Get a syringe, fill it with water, attach it, and fill up the balloon, go through it again. It's a simple raised bag, which creates enough pressure and an increase in volume to hopefully save that mother's life. But by distilling that process, we're not just increasing the speed of the intervention itself to stop the bleeding quickly to save the mother. The other thing it does, and this is where other stakeholders come in, and perhaps the bigger picture, is the overall cost of this intervention. The cost of the device itself is perhaps not the key element. The overall cost of this intervention, which is stopping it being rolled out in the countries where it's needed most, is the cost of training people to use it. So by decreasing the complexity of the interaction, our hypothesis is that perhaps you don't need any training at all. Perhaps what you can do is just phone somebody up, get the advice you need to use this device if you're a birth assistant with minimal training. And it's these things we'll be hopefully test next year. So this is an example of where the speed, it's not just about the speed of using the device, this could help with the speed of actually deploying the device.
Thanks. So as we draw to a close, thanks Lucy, I just wanted to round up by, it sounds like an awful lot of hard work to go out there and do all this mapping and talk to lots of people, and it sounds quite expensive, and is it really worth it, and so on. What I really wanted to just summarise as a sort of final thought piece is how, by investing in this very, very detailed understanding of all your stakeholders right at the start of the project, you can actually use that requirement specification to help you make key decisions throughout the NPD process thereafter. This is a product we developed back in 2006, 2007. If any of you are familiar with it, it's actually a startup company. The 2 guys that started it had this vision to put the best quality mapping available around the world in the hands of users with a big sign saying, here you are, here you are. Where all the competitors at the time were doing these sort of monochrome, highly pixelated coordinate-based systems where you needed a sort of degree in something obtuse to try and work out where you were. What was interesting was is it life-changing? Yes, absolutely, if you're in the Highlands and a blizzard is coming in and so on. There was a bit of a crossroads in the development where around 2006, 2007, the first smartphones were starting to come in with touchscreen interfaces, and we thought, well, hang on a sec, this is the next thing. Do we go with touchscreens or do we stick with mechanical buttons? And it was a genuine crossroads. But what was really interesting was when we went back to the user requirement specification, looked at all our stakeholders, the answer was really, really obvious where we should go. And that was that the predominant insight was that a lot of these users were wearing gloves when they were using this device. You know, they're out in the cold, the rain, the wind, the sunshine. You know, drops and knocks would be a routine occurrence. You know, the screen was likely to get damaged and so on. So really armed with that very, very intimate understanding of our users, you know, we stuck with mechanical buttons and we created a polycarbonate screen guard that could be periodically thrown away, replaced, and so on. And so, you know, several generations on, this product is still winning awards, and there's not many consumer electronics products you can probably say that about. So, you know, this is not wasted time, it's not wasted investment, you know, really understanding the user and doing all this mapping earlier on. It can not only help you formulate a great specification at the start, it can help you save time and money and decision and repeat iterations onward throughout the NPD process. So just to summarise then, it's vital to do all of that mapping, really get yourself immersed in your stakeholder environment. We use these particular 3 drivers on things where there are life-changing situations at risk, keeping our stakeholders, not just users, stakeholders, at the heart of that process. And then that, of course, allows us to achieve success through a very simplified, prioritised user experience.